Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. It has been a while. I missed you guys and I am glad to be back filming quite the video today. We're gonna get real here, and this is about as real as you can get because I'm not wearing any makeup because it's like 97 degrees outside and it's almost like 80, I think 81 degrees inside my house. And these lights are going to be causing a problem. So apologies if you hear fans going, if you hear my dog wandering around, if you notice sweat forming on my face. This is not how I want to start off this video. So in this video I wanted to talk about some new ideas about the cruelty-free movement, cruelty-free community, the definition of cruelty-free. A lot of this was brought up in an article that was recently posted on the blog My Beauty Bunny by Jen, another cruelty-free YouTuber that I follow here on YouTube, Sarah Rose. She did a kind of responsive video to that article, and watching that video made me start to question so many things. And just for the past 24 hours I have been struggling to understand what all of this new information means and what I'm going to do with it all. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but I really want it to be extremely clear that these are just thoughts that I'm having. I'm not trying to persuade anybody to think this way. I am not going into this thinking that I have all the answers. I highly encourage that you do your own research and come to your own conclusions regarding the topics that I'm about to talk about. Whatever decision resonates with you is fine, and I want people to understand that. And I would ask that if you're going to continue to watch this video, you do so with an open mind, and if you're going to partake in any discussion surrounding this video, please keep it respectful. Don't be out there judging people just because they might have a different opinion than you. My intention for this video is just to kind of share where my mind is going with all of these things. I haven't even necessarily made a concrete decision, and I don't know what I'm necessarily going to feel, if I'm still going to feel this way a week from now. But one thing I do know is that it is a conversation that we need to be having. I'm putting this video out there to just kind of keep that conversation going and hear from you guys. I want to hear from people. I want this to be an open discussion where people can feel free to share their own opinions. So that requires us all to remain non-judgmental and have respect for other people that we may be engaging in discussions with. I have got pages on pages on pages of notes for this video, so I have come prepared. So before I get into talking about my thoughts and all of that, I think it's really important to go, especially if you have no idea what article I'm talking about, I will leave it linked down below, but there's an article from Jen who runs the blog My Beauty Bunny. This blog is a cruelty-free blog. It's been around for quite a while. It's one of the ones kind of up there with Logical Harmony and Cruelty-Free Kitty, as a resource for, what brands are cruelty-free and how to go cruelty-free and all of that. She is a reputable source. I wholeheartedly believe that she is speaking genuinely, that she does not have any ulterior motives. The one thing I will say is that I was a little disappointed there weren't more citations, quite honestly. But I was kind of stalking a couple of Facebook groups that I know that she was posting in and having discussions with people in, and she did mention, I believe in one of the comments, that a lot of her sources wouldn't talk to her unless they were off the record. So she couldn't say, oh, I know this because so-and-so from this organization told me, right? So it's lacking a little bit in evidence that you can go and verify yourself. At first was problematic to me, but the more that I thought about it, and I'll kind of get into why, the more I realized that having specific numbers wasn't really that important. So her article is about whether or not we should consider brands like Wet n Wild, First Aid Beauty, Physicians Formula, Dove, Herbal Essences, those brands that are PETA certified that still sell in China, whether or not we should consider those brands cruelty-free. And her article is basically an argument saying that this is why she does consider them to be cruelty-free. I follow Sarah Rose on Twitter, and so I saw her posting about this article, and I went and I read it, and I was like, wow, that was not what I was expecting. In fact, it was quite the opposite. When I read the title of that article, I got out my pitchfork, and I got out my torch. I was like, I'm gonna read this article, and then I'm ready to just rip this girl to shreds. Not Sarah, but Jen, because I was like, how dare someone write this article? It's full of bullshit, obviously. And then I read the article, dropped my torch. That led me to watch Sarah Rose's video reacting basically to this information, which led me even further down the rabbit hole than I thought that I was gonna go. Literally last week, if you were to ask me, do you think that you would be changing your definition of what cruelty-free is, or even looking at the cruelty-free movement as possibly problematic, I would have been like, no, what are you talking about? Get out of here. Because I'm reading this article and I'm like, why is this making sense to me? This feels so wrong. I was, discussing it with some of my friends and watching Sarah Rose's video, and I have so many thoughts. If you have not read the article, or if you have not watched Sarah Rose's video yet, please find the relevant links down below in the description box. I would highly recommend, in this order, to read the article first and foremost, then go watch Sarah Rose's video, and then you could come back here to mine. I'm going to be referencing things that they talk about in the article and in Sarah's video, so I think it's important for you to also have that same background in order to understand some of my points. I want to discuss just like the new ideas that are forming in my head about what it really means to be cruelty-free, where the problems I see in the community are, and where I find myself sort of standing with all of this new information. But I am considering pursuing other alternatives other than cruelty-free as a way to support these causes that fits not only my personal ethics better, but that I think will be more impactful. So please go read the article that Jen wrote. But to summarize, she is making an argument that brands who sell in China but are able to get around the pre-market animal testing should be considered cruelty-free. Now, the cruelty-free community kind of has a very black and white approach to being cruelty-free, and if you sell in China, you're not cruelty-free. That's kind of been the big rule. We've given PETA a lot of shit for certifying brands that sell in China. Just to make sure everyone's really clear, I want to talk about the difference between pre-market animal testing and post-market animal testing. Now, pre-market animal testing is the testing that is done before a product goes to market, right? So pre-market. So this would be like if you want to enter the Chinese market and your products are not made in China, they're imported, you have to do animal testing in order to prove your product is safe before it can go into the Chinese market. Post-market animal testing is when the product is already on the market, and for whatever reason, be it a consumer complaint or some sort of environmental concern or probably an endless amount of possibilities, honestly, the Chinese government can decide to pull that product off the shelf and test it on animals in order to prove that it is safe. To summarize Jen's article, she's basically saying that after talking with many experts in the Chinese cosmetic market and industry, there's organizations that help brands enter the Chinese market, that help them navigate all of this legal requirements surrounding animal testing. After months of consulting with these types of people and getting some of her information did come from some of the brands. I think First Aid Beauty was one brand that was giving her some of the information, but she wasn't relying solely on them. So again, I don't think that she's being, bought or anything like that. After doing all of this research, she has found that essentially the risk of post-market animal testing in China is extremely low. and usually they make post-market animal testing data available to the public, so it's part of the public record. And according to this public record, there hasn't been any post-market animal testing in the past few years. I will take this opportunity to say that there's probably a large possibility that there is post-market animal testing being done that is not part of the public record. No government is that transparent. There's always kind of loopholes and exceptions and whatnot, and by nature, governments are not that transparent. Not to say that they're intentionally hiding any of that information, but it is possible that there are things that are not being reported. Her article then goes on to inform us that China is not the only country that has post-market animal testing. Any country out there, there is a possibility in that country for there to be post-market animal testing. If you take the US, for example, and many countries, any sort of academic purpose for animal testing is exempt from any sort of ban or any laws surrounding animal testing. So academia is exempt from those types of things. The governments are usually exempt as well. Jen's article states that basically post-market animal testing can occur anywhere. It's not just in China that it can occur. And in fact, this is one area of her article I thought was well done, is that she does actually point out that despite the animal testing ban in the EU still has animal testing being done post-market because of, you guessed it, academic research. So again, academic stuff is usually exempt from this. Now in the US, I believe it's the Animal Welfare Act that states that if you are testing on mice or rats, you do not have to report it. So think about all of the potential post-market animal testing that could be being done on mice and rats that isn't being reported because it doesn't need to be. Jen states in her article again that basically she believes that the risk of post-market animal testing in China is equal to the risk of post-market animal testing in pretty much any other country. And that is to say that it's all across the board extremely low. There's a lot of reasons why many people who would be doing this animal testing would opt for a better way of testing. Animal testing isn't accurate, it takes a while to get results. There's a lot of reasons not to do it anyways. The main point here is that even if it is more likely in one country versus another country, the fact of the matter remains that it's still possible in any country. We will never know. We will never be able to qualify, count up how many of these post-market animal tests are being done in one country versus another, because there are so many loopholes, there's so many exemptions. There's just no possible way for us to ever fully 100% know that perhaps, China is testing more post-market or not. For all we know, as an average consumer, Canada could be the one that's doing more animal testing. We wouldn't know, because a lot of this stuff is just not transparent. For the record, I don't think Canada is actually doing more post-market animal testing. The point remains is that basically this entire time we have been holding China to a higher standard. I'll get into this more, but I think some of that stems from xenophobia, that we would hold them to a higher standard and try and villainize them. Again, this is why I kind of think that the numbers don't necessarily need to be there in this article versus for example, how many post-market animal testing China is doing versus the US. I don't think we necessarily need those numbers to make a decision here. I think that the possibility of any country doing these post-market animal testing and A, us not being able to know about it, and B, the brands not having any knowledge of it or really any control over it, it goes to show me that one of three things needs to happen here. The first one is that we need to somehow accept that holding China to a higher standard is for some reason okay, which it's not, and I refuse to hold them to a higher standard, to hold them to a double standard, so that option's out. which leaves us with two options. Either brands that sell in China but are able to get around the pre-market animal testing should be considered cruelty-free, or option two, that no brand can be considered cruelty-free. So another key point that really stuck out to me in this article is that she's stating that we really shouldn't be looking at the brands as our enemy with this whole thing, right? And I would agree. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where you sort of need to pick your battles, is what I believe. What's failing us right now in terms of animal testing is that countries A, have no bans against it, or in China's case, they do have some requirements that require animal testing to be done. And in other cases, like the EU has a ban on animal testing, but it's just not good enough. And there are some states in the US that have bans on animal testing, but until it gets to the federal level, it doesn't do much good. The key thing here is not that the brands are the problem necessarily. The problem really is the legislation. The legislation, the laws, that's what's failing us here. You were to think, well, okay, so the Chinese government and the other governments are our enemy here then. Those are the people we need to go after for change. Well, here's the deal. Governments are extremely slow. If you actually look at kind of the history of the laws surrounding animal testing changing in China, you actually see that they've done a lot in recent years. They're not completely 100% there yet by any means, but they are working to change this stuff, and they're actually making changes. I had heard, I'll see if I can find the article again, and I don't really know how reputable it is or anything, and I tried to find more information and I couldn't, but it did claim that animal testing was kind of scheduled to be phased out of China by April 2020. And then COVID happened. If you keep that in mind, and maybe with a grain of salt, but if you do keep that in mind, that means that we are potentially a couple months away from China getting rid of its animal testing requirements, maybe a couple years away, but either way, we are close. So China is making change. People doing with China is like, they're like, China, you suck, you're not, doing this. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at the facts, they have been making changes. And if you remember again that all governments are very slow to enact change, right? You have to kind of almost, I mean, in my opinion, I kind of admire the fact that they've gotten as far as they have. So I refuse to continue to villainize China. Again, I think a lot of this is steeped in a little bit of xenophobia. Sarah Rose talked about this a little bit in her video, and I will be talking about it in a minute a little bit more. But I don't think we need to be making these brands out to be enemies anymore, and I don't think we need to be villainizing China for this either, because they are working to change things. And I do kind of want to take a minute to say, I know that I have said in the past, probably things like, man, stupid China, not being cruelty-free, man, and what I always meant by that was like the Chinese government, not like the Chinese people as a race or anything like that. But I do see now how it could be taken like that, and that's something I will talk about later on. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I did just want to say, I know I don't think I said anything like, I was definitely always talking about the government. But I think that there is a lot of people that don't mean the Chinese government, they mean China kind of as a whole. This next part that I want to talk about, so like hold on to what I just said, but we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit. This is kind of all of the stuff that I've started to think about after watching Sarah Rose's video. She really got me thinking, and I want to thank her for sharing her thoughts with this because it is kind of scary. Like, I don't know how people are going to react, and I by no means want to offend people, but I also do need to stay true to myself and the way that I view things. I can't please everyone, and so it really has to be about what is resonating with me, and that's why you need to also do what resonates with you. The situation is so much more complicated. It's not a black or white issue. There's so much more to it. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is that in my opinion, I think that the term cruelty-free is problematic and misleading. I used to kind of view it as people just arguing over semantics when people would say, but cruelty-free, well, they shouldn't use that term unless it's also, you know, free of child labor or, you know, poor working conditions. And I would be like, okay, but they're, you know, find a different term for that, because like if you look up what cruelty-free means, it's really obvious that it means like whether or not a brand tests on animals. And so I really thought of it as like people are just trying to argue semantics. And I do think that there are people out there that argue over the semantics of the term. I've come to realize that it's not about semantics. This is a problematic term, in my opinion. And again, I do think it's very misleading, because you could just use the term not tested on animals and it would be very, very clear what it is you're talking about to any consumer, even if they don't have a background in the issue. But even more than that, I feel that the cruelty-free community is a bit problematic in itself. We are so intently focusing on one specific issue that I do worry that sort of as a community we are drowning out the voices of other issues when people try to bring awareness to other ethical issues in the beauty industry. There's a ton of them, right? There's poor working conditions, child labor, unethical sourcing of materials, if you think of mica mining. And even beyond that, there's issues with, you know, brands being racist or homophobic or even sexist. There's brands that have, you know, extreme diversity issues where they're, you know, they're just not being inclusive, and that is an ethical problem. Environmental issues, you know, wasteful packaging, you know, things like single-use items, all of that, right? There's so many, and you can keep going down the rabbit hole. And another one that I was touching on earlier that is, I believe, a problem specifically within the cruelty-free community is that I do sort of, now that it's on my radar, I do kind of feel like the cruelty-free movement is just being steered by veiled xenophobia. This is the first time I've ever really heard the argument that post-market animal testing could be happening in other countries. And I know that's not the first time anyone has made this argument, but it is the first time that I've heard it. So many people always say, and they talk about it as if China is the only country that would ever do post-market animal testing because they're so horrible. A lot of times that is the rhetoric being used, and I refuse to continue to take part in that. I have to wonder, and I have to ask, is the cruelty-free movement doing more harm than good? And my answer to this, with just everything that I've been thinking thus far, is yes. I think it might be. You can feel free to make your own opinion on this, obviously. Don't just take my word for it, but I do think that there's a huge problem here in solely focusing on being cruelty-free, only shopping from cruelty-free brands, and not looking into other areas. That leaves the question with, okay, well, where do we go from here then? I'm gonna switch gears, and I'm sorry that this video is as long as it is, but I feel like these are all very important things that I need to discuss with people that are on my channel. I have some opinions and sort of, you know, my own thoughts about kind of specifically how certain areas of this whole thing works. It has always been my opinion, and I have stated this in other videos, that I do believe that any blame, any ownership of solving any of these ethical issues should not be placed on individual consumers. And this is for two reasons. The first reason is that consumers can't know everything that they need to know in order to always make the most ethical decision. And furthermore, and this is something that Sarah stated in her video that I wholeheartedly agree with, there is no such thing as 100% ethical consumption. Anytime you buy something, there is an impact that has, be it environmental, be it social impact, whatever, right? There is some sort of impact. Second part of this is that I believe that the amount of change we need is at a big enough scale that it requires governments and corporations to do their part to do better. These things are happening on a huge scale. So it's going to take those two entities to fix the problem. And I wholeheartedly believe, and some of you might think I'm getting a little conspiratorial here. I do kind of believe that when corporations and governments and society in general tries to put the blame and the ownership of this onto the individual consumer, I believe that this is just a method of them passing the buck, so to speak. Think about the whole reusable straw thing, right? A complete Twitter stranger will completely destroy you online for using a plastic straw. And I'm not saying that they're bad and that you shouldn't have a reusable straw. Even if everyone in the world is using a reusable straw, this does not get rid of the issues that we have surrounding plastic in the environment. It just doesn't. It could help, like, a little, but it's by no means some, you know, man, the environment's going to shit because you're not using a reusable straw. I think that kind of thing is stuff that ends up getting spread by businesses and by the government that doesn't want to do anything about it. And they want to distract us with these kinds of campaigns so that we don't ask them to stand up and fucking do something. Not to get too sassy. Another opinion I have about this kind of stuff in general is that I don't think voting with your dollar really works. I think it can work, but it doesn't always work. And the reason being is because I think it's very unclear and it's a very passive thing. It's actually kind of, if you think about it, it's a non-action because you're not giving your money to a brand. I just don't think that that is enough anymore. And I don't think it's the answer. That there are more direct ways to get your opinions heard and to show your support for certain causes. The reason that I'm kind of saying this is because in the time that I've been cruelty-free, only one brand has gone from being not cruelty-free, like specifically like we knew that they were testing on animals, to legit cruelty-free, not in China, and that was CoverGirl. And that's the only one. And we've seen brand after brand after brand decide to go into the Chinese market, even though they knew that most people who are cruelty-free would not consider them to be cruelty-free. Voting with our dollar hasn't really seemed to be affecting the change that we sort of set out to be affecting. The way that I see it is that it's a very unclear way to message to a brand that you don't like what they're doing. If a brand sees decreased sales, it could be for a variety of reasons. Yeah, maybe it's because they're not cruelty-free, but it also could be because the economy sucks or because they haven't released good products lately. You know, the brands don't necessarily know unless people are being very clear and active in voicing their concerns and why they're not purchasing. And so I don't think that voting with your dollar is really the way to go, and that's my personal opinion. This brings me to the conclusion that my time, my energy, and my money is better spent by researching these issues and figuring out more direct ways to affect positive change. Donating to organizations that are specifically trying to that are trying to drive policy changes. I could write to policymakers, to brands, to just let them know that these are concerns that I have. I can write to these brands about all sorts of different issues, and we don't have to limit ourselves to just the cruelty-free label. There's other ways to push for change, is what I'm getting at, and I would like to explore those ways because I think that they're more direct and they're more active, whereas voting with your dollar is a very passive thing, and I don't know if it necessarily always gets the point across to the brands and to the government that is making these laws, right? I don't think governments don't really care if you boycott a brand because they're not cruelty-free. And this goes back to not making the brands the enemy and really focusing on where a lot of this legislation is failing us. The other point that I wanted to make, and this is kind of my last one, there always seems to be a flip side to everything. Take Mac, for example. I believe, and I could be wrong, but let's pretend I'm right, I believe that they manufacture their products in either the US or Canada, and both of those countries have stricter labor laws. I don't know what brand said this, and I don't remember if this was in the article that Jen wrote. I don't know if she had mentioned this, that First Aid Beauty had said this or something, but I do remember hearing it that a brand was saying that, well, how are we supposed to help change policies in China if we are not in the Chinese market? And I do believe that's true. If you have a brand that's trying to go to China and be like, please change your laws, and China's like, why are you talking to me, you know? So I could see Mac making the decision like, okay, we're gonna sell in China so we can, and I do believe that they try and spin it this way, and I have no idea if they're being genuine or not. And that's, again, it goes back to, we won't know. You can't know everything about a brand. You can't know everything about their intentions. I know that Mac has stated in the past that that's the reason they're in the Chinese market, is to make policy changes. I asked myself, well, okay, Mac, then why won't you just get around the pre-market animal testing so you can sell in China and be cruelty-free? And then I thought to myself, because there was a comment actually on Sarah Rose's video that got my wheels turning again. Someone was saying, well, I don't purchase from brands that are manufactured in China. And I think they were saying too that they were kind of like, I don't really get why people would boycott brands selling in China but not brands that are made in China. Because there are labor conditions in China that are not good. I have to wonder if Mac decided, well, we're gonna go into the Chinese market to be like, we're gonna change your laws. Mac might have made the decision that it fit their ethics to push for change in China in terms of their animal testing policies, but also they won't be manufacturing there because they don't want to contribute to poor working conditions. Specifically with an issue like whether or not a brand is cruelty-free, there are other factors that do play into it. It's not something that is black and white, like I've said a million times. And I think in a case like Mac, you can kind of argue that they are being ethical, just kind of in a different way. I feel like with a lot of these things, you can make one argument and there will be a flip side to it. So another example that I have is a lot of people want to be very minimal with their makeup collection because they believe that it's the ethical thing to do to reduce their consumption. If you want to play devil's advocate, you could say that, well, I'm buying a lot of makeup, which is actually an ethical thing to do because I'm putting money into the economy. And if we were to all go minimalist, right, honestly, our economy would probably collapse. And you might say that, well, maybe that's a good thing, or capitalism is evil, hope it dies, whatever. The kind of last thing that I want to talk about before I conclude this video is that I started the Project Pan, Mission 100% Cruelty-Free Project Pan. That was me. I started that, if you didn't know already. And I do see the importance of distancing myself from the term cruelty-free as well as the cruelty-free community. Not the people of the community, but kind of the general ideas of the community. I do think that the movement is problematic. Not the people in the community for the most part, though I'm sure that there are some people that are definitely problematic, especially when you see how a lot of this is kind of rooted in xenophobia, and it sort of just seems like a sort of an excuse to continue to be xenophobic and racist and continue that rhetoric, right? When it comes to this Project Pan, as it stands right now, I'm going to not be continuing that Project Pan. I think it's very important that I not. If you are doing this Project Pan or you were considering doing it, honestly do what feels right for you. If that's quitting it like I am, I'm not gonna be mad, obviously. I think a lot of people will understand why. If you want to continue the project, that's also totally up to you. Feel free to do that. I mean, obviously I can't stop anybody, nor would I wish to. One idea that I did have was if you were to continue this Project Pan, you might consider changing the name. If any of what I've been talking about in this video resonates with you, you might consider changing the name. I was thinking something like Mission Ethical Project Pan for anyone who's really trying to pan any brands that they feel like aren't ethical. I would encourage anyone who is deciding to continue that Project Pan to keep it light, try to keep it as positive as possible, and try to remember that the brands aren't necessarily the enemies. Unfortunately, I do feel like that Project Pan sort of does continue that mentality. I started that Project Pan as a way to encourage people to decide to go cruelty-free despite still having non-cruelty-free items in their collections, because I would get comments all the time saying, I really would like to go cruelty-free, but I still have some non-cruelty-free items in my collection. And I was like, so do I. So do a lot of people I know that consider themselves to be cruelty-free. So I wanted to create a project that would kind of encourage people to use up the stuff that they have and kind of make the commitment from then on to go cruelty-free. Had I known that this would be such a complicated issue, I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably wouldn't have started that Project Pan. I can't find the post anymore, but I did see someone on Instagram had changed the name from Mission 100 Cruelty-Free to Mission Complicated. Do what feels right for you. I just worry that the Project Pan is not, I obviously started it with good intentions, but I'm worried that it's doing more harm than good by sort of perpetuating this idea that the brands are the enemies, that they're evil, that they should be villainized, etc. I will probably not be continuing that Project Pan. In fact, I would consider this is me quitting that Project Pan right now. Regardless of whether or not I sort of change my views as of right now, I'm quitting that Project Pan. I could always take it up later and restart it or whatever, and if people still want to tag me in it, that's fine. I won't be updating the playlist anymore. If someone wants to take over that, DM me, let me know. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I'm just not going to be managing it anymore. I'm divorcing the Project Pan, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's necessarily harmful in and of itself. I just think that if people aren't aware, it could sort of be causing more harm than good, and that's just my 2 cents. And again, if you're doing this Project Pan and you're having a really fun time with it, don't worry about it. You do what you want to do, okay? Whether that's quitting it, whether it's changing the name, kind of changing up what types of products you're putting into it, or just continuing it as is, it's up to you. What I do feel like is the right path for me is to not necessarily worry so much about the cruelty-free status or whether or not a brand is ethical. Like, obviously taking into consideration these things and being aware of them, I will continue to be doing, but when it comes to these issues, I really do believe that the answer isn't, in my opinion, it's not to vote with my dollar. And so what I mean by this is that I truly believe going forward that instead of putting all of my time and energy into keeping up with which brand is ethical and, coming to find out that the one brand that I thought is the most ethical of all, and then it turns out that the brand owner is a pedophile or something like that. You just like, you never know. You're never going to have all that information. And so rather than trying to gather that information, I honestly do think that it's important for me to find other ways to contribute positively to these types of causes. I'm not saying that I'm about to run over to my computer and make a Sephora order and buy from, NARS and Pat McGrath and, Make Up Forever or whatever. But what I am saying is that I don't consider myself to be cruelty-free as of right now, and I will explore kind of just these other ways of changing things and of supporting causes that I am researching more. And that's the other thing too, is I think I've been sort of lazy. I'm like, well, I'm cruelty-free, so I'm doing good for, things, and I don't need to look into anything else because this is my cause and I've, got it. And it's kind of that like sort of white feminist mentality, I feel like, where you kind of stick to the one thing and you're like, this is all that matters and I'm a good person because I support this or whatever. And I just feel like there's a lot more for me to be educated on, and solely concentrating on whether or not things were cruelty-free or not was taking away from me researching other issues. To answer your question, yes, potentially in the future, I might buy from MAC. I might also decide not to buy from another brand because they're just doing everything wrong. I don't have the answers to that yet. I'm still letting this information settle, and this is just sort of my reaction to it thus far. I know some people might be disappointed to hear that. I hope that what I was saying still made sense to you and you can kind of see why I'm thinking that way at the very least. I really hope that you guys got something out of this video, whether you agree with me on things or not. And I hope to have a discussion with you in the comments. Again, I do want this to be an open discussion. That is my intention with posting this video, is not to, again, not to persuade people, not to justify anything or anything. It was just literally to let you guys know what I'm thinking and to hear what you're thinking. If there's anything that you are just really upset about or anything like that, feel free to DM me if that's better for you to talk about this kind of stuff. But definitely leave me a comment down below. Just let me know, you know, when you read the article or heard anyone else talking about this stuff, what were you thinking? What was going through your head? Where are you at now? I really want to emphasize that I'm by no means like making a final decision that can't be undone later. And if any new information or any new ideas that really resonate with me do surface, I will be very open to kind of rethinking things. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Anyways, stay safe, stay healthy, have a beautiful week, and I will see you all in my next video.